consistently so that we can have a nice neat stitch on the rear side, which is going to end up on the inside of the gusset. Right, so we've stitched the gusset and partition into the main body of the bag. Stitches have been, rather than tapped down, compressed in with our edging pliers. So we have a seam going all the way around, yet to finish the edges obviously. Now what we want to do is find out exactly where the lock goes. And depending on the dimensions that you've created, the tolerances that you've kept close to my design as you possibly can, there are always going to be variations, and I always encourage the first time you make something is to then mark on your pattern where the lock goes, kind of as you're making it, almost making this essentially a prototype on your first one. But much like creating a custom gusset and then finding out the measurement, we're going to create a custom lock position, and then we can note down exactly where it goes, the measurements, etc. So what I recommend that you do is take a block of wood. This is just a piece of 2x4 planed. I'm going to place that carefully, watching out for any rough edges. Has been sanded. Carefully place it on the inside, right about here is fine, where I predict the lock is going to go. Just to bulk this out, give you a bit more of a stable platform. Then I'm going to place the pattern. Okay, so this is the 400 by 300 pattern, and this pattern is the one that we used to mark out and cut this partition and also the exterior panel, which will be going on after this. So I'm going to place this down, and right here on my gusset edges, the corner, I'm going to place the corner of the pattern. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. It's not going to want to stay there, so we're going to persuade it with some good strong clamps. These clamps are pretty good. They're made by ADM. I'm sure there are many brands. Keeping it nice and accurate. This is simulating the exterior panel. Just to keep everything as even as possible, I'm just going to hold the bottom of the gusset level with the bottom of the panel pattern. Now, before we bring our lock into play, what I want you to do is just exercise the leather a little bit. What I mean by that is just start bending it and let it get used to a new position. So what we can do is just, you can press down because we've got a block of something in there, and start folding it down and across. Just hold it down, and I want you to look at it level. Okay, so bring your head down and have a look. How does the top of the case look? Is it level? Is it square? Okay, bring it in a little bit more. Hold that position. See what that looks like. Get your head down. Okay, momentarily I can remove one of these just to have a little closer inspection and to allow this to bend. I mean, that looks really good on the inside. It's flat. It's following the contours. That looks about right to me. So let's open that back out. Now grab yourself a pencil and your lock, and we can bring the flap over. Let's remove our tape for a second. Now we can hold everything down, make life a little easy for ourselves. A couple of pattern weights there, and I'm pulling that lock in, double checking. Everything looks nice and level. The top looks level. I'm happy with that. What I'm going to do now is just mark the bottom. So that is where the bottom of my lock goes. Double check. Take a look at the pattern. Is the pattern still at the top by the gusset? It is. Does it look good? Bring it back down again. Place the lock back in. Get down there. Have a look. Does it look right? Okay. Ask yourself these questions, because once we mark this, then create the pattern outline, cut out our leather, install our lock, and all we had to do was one more double check to make sure it was correct. It's very easy to get this wrong, okay? So assume it's wrong on the first try and then double check again. Maybe turn the entire case around and check it the opposite way just to get a different perspective. Because once the lock is installed, once the leather has been cut, that, my friends, is it. So always double check your measurements when it comes to marking out for your lock. So here's our pattern. We have our mark right at the bottom of the lock, okay? So you can mark on there, bottom of the lock, in case you think it's the center for some reason. Things happen. And what I'm going to do now is just reinforce the center line. I can see the line from the pattern, okay, where I cut on this side, so I can see it through the masking tape, and I just gave a little mark on each side there, so I can simply line these up just to give us a center line to work for, double checking, of course. 20, 20, and this is overall 40, so that's good. We're going to take our lock that we're working with. Might be a bit more challenging if your backing plate is a different dimension, but on this particular lock, the Abbey England lock, let's get it right, the backing plate is the exact same dimension as the exterior of the lock, which is handy, so we can put the lock to the side and work from this. Now this particular lock has a width of 51 millimeters across. And what I'm going to do is half that measurement, so half of 51 is 25.5, so pretty much an inch actually. Okay, so I've marked half the width of this lock up from that measurement. So when I put this down there now, this is actually in the center, as you can see. So I'm going to take a compass, put my pencil back in, place the pin of the compass in the center there, press, and I'm going to bring the pencil out until it lines up with our mark that we made for the bottom of the lock. Okay, so now that's in place. Maybe just half a millimeter more, and that way the circle will appear just on the outside of the backing plate so that I can see it. That's perfect, yeah. So I can centralize it. That's why I made it a fraction, the circle a fraction larger. Otherwise, if it's exactly the same, it's difficult to see where the line is. So now I can see it quite clearly. Now, one issue that you can have when marking out and cutting the relief for the lock, okay, because obviously the lock is quite flat, but the actual mechanism on the inside is quite bulky, as you can see there. Okay, so all our mechanism is inside this little housing. So this relief mark is where the housing goes through. So what you want to avoid is cutting it out where it is askew, all right? Because you'll be forever looking at your askew lock, and also it's going to be much more difficult for the hasp to actually catch in there, because it's going to want to twist the hasp and the flap in order to get inside. So we want this to be as level as possible. You could do a pretty good job just by eyeballing it if you want to go ahead and do that, but one little trick is to make sure it is centered in our little circle. Take a pencil and just mark one of the long sides, okay? Just a short mark right here. Now, take a longer ruler, roughly level it up to the center line. And on one end, measure what we've got, 16, and we've got 14 and a half there, so move it up. 15 and a half, 15 and a half. Okay, so now the ruler is level with the center line. I'm going to make a mark and continue this one here along. So what this is giving me is a straight edge to work for. So placing the locking plate back down, this is the top of the locking plate here, which has a wider relief than the bottom, because this is where the hasp goes. Centering it in the circle, and then I can see here that the side is now level with that pencil mark. Okay, so there's no rotation going on. Now I know that, I can go ahead and mark everything else out. And this side piece here that I just drew in is the anchor point for my measurement. And now you can see the relief. And to mark it out, just a load of horizontal lines, which marks our waist. Okay, placing it back down, center it up again. This time I'm going to mark the holes. If you're using the Abbey England lock, but these side two don't actually get used for anything, which is strange. There's only 4. So with everything lined up, the outer 4 holes is where we need to mark. So now you can go ahead, take a craft knife and very carefully go around, taking your time. Now this piece has been cut out. I'm going to go around and find those little circles I drew, which is where our pins are going to go through, or essentially our rivets. And then just use the hole punch lightly at first, just to make sure that we're central. And one quick little test is just to take your lock and then place it upright into the relief and then double check that it works, okay? Not too tight, but not too loose. Right, so let's take our piece of leather and place the pattern down accurately over the top. Then place down a couple pattern weights flanking either side of the lock. Again, double, triple check, quadruple check. When you're happy, you have 2 choices. You can use a chisel to cut it out, like a woodworking chisel, or alternative, which is what I'm going to do, is actually use a scratch awl or something similar to go around and scratch out. That way I can cut without the pattern getting in the way. Good. And then just a light tap in here. Making sure that the vibrations don't move anything. Good. Removing our pattern. What we have now is our markings so that we can go ahead and cut out that relief and also our holes that need punching out. I'm going to do the holes first. Fresh blade. I'm going to go around with a light primary cut first of all. And then once I've made that primary cut, I'm less likely to slip outside of that cut. Rotating my work as I go. Take your time with this because it's quite an intricate cut. There's lots of different angles. And now we've gone all the way around, we can go a little bit deeper. Good, so let's see if our lock fits. And it does. Little resistance, but that's what I like, so it's a nice snug fit. But you will notice if you're using the Abbey England lock, you will notice these 2 little ears either side of the mechanism housing. Okay, so these little ears are part of the stamped metal piece that's cut out, that's turned at a right angle, and it's riveted straight to the faceplate, the front of the lock. So there is a little bit of thickness, as you can see, roughly I'd say a millimeter and a quarter on pretty much both sides. And that relief needs to be taken care of. So let's put the lock back in. And what I'm going to do is place my fingers in that area where those little ears are. And I'm going to press really firmly, tilting it one way, tilting it the other, pushing all around that area. And what I'm looking to do is make an impression. So if you look there, you can see where I've pressed it in nice and firmly and it's caused little dents either side. Good. So what I can do now is follow the outline of that dent with a grooving tool. Now you can remove the guard and use a regular grooving tool like this to go around, or a little gouge groover like this. Starting from the edge, I'm going to go around and follow that line. Okay, if you're not sure, remove less. You can always remove more, but putting it back is a bit more of a challenge. Once you've got that outline, you can then follow through and begin removing excess material in between. Same on this side. Another tri-fit. Okay, so that's a lot better, especially on the left hand side. A little bit more needs to be removed. Be very careful about going further out, because that can come very close to the edge of the faceplate, and you don't want to see any cutouts when your bag is complete. I could just cut these out completely, but I like to keep as much material in there as possible for strength and longevity. Perfect. And that fits nice and flush and nice and level. So once we've riveted the backing plate in there to add a little bit of compression, everything's going to be pulled together just nicely. Now I want to show you a little hack using the two pieces that we cut out, the piece that we cut out from the pattern for the lock relief and the piece that we cut out from the leather. I'm going to align both pieces over the top of each other. Make sure everything is lined up just so. And then in the center, where you originally put your compass, there's a little hole there. We're going to carry that hole all the way through to the leather. So now we have a center line. Bringing our leather piece back, our front panel, we're going to place this back inside there. So now we have a central hole in which to work from. Now, taking your backing plate, which should have that same shape, place it over the top and line it up. Okay, so it's now aligned with that piece that we just put back in. I'm going to take a roundel and make a very small, barely detectable mark in the leather. You can barely see it. You guys won't be able to see it. Unlikely. And from that mark, I'm going to come out 6 millimeters. Okay, so I have a 6 millimeter mark past the outside diameter of the lock. Because what I'm going to do is make a circle going all the way around, where I can then follow with a pricking iron, and I want the stitches to be 6 millimeters outside of the lock. So now I can get my dividers, loosen them, place one side in the hole and one side in that mark 6 millimeters larger than the lock, and then tighten down. From here I'm going to make a light score, making sure that we keep the center in the hole. the way around. Now you can remove that centerpiece and you can see we have a line going all the way around accurately. So when I put my lock in place, you can see that line just going around the outer edge there. So now you can go around with a 2-tooth iron over the top of that circle that we just created. Now I know some of you really want to pay attention to the details when it comes to stitching, and you would love to have a perfect circle where there is not a short or a long stitch at the end, it's just perfect all the way around. That is possible, but what you need to do is trial this on say a piece of scrap leather or card first of all, and then what you could try is a circle instead of 6 millimeters out from the outer edge of the lock. You could try one that is 6.25 or 6.5, and then just keep either making it very slightly larger or fractionally smaller. I wouldn't really go much smaller, to be honest, so maybe 6.25 or 6.5, and just keep fractionally enlarging the circle on your piece of card, and then going around with your pricking iron until you get to a measurement where all the prick marks are the same distance. And that way you don't have to finish on a long or a short stitch. It's not really going to make much of a difference if you're using tonal thread. If you're, in this case, using navy with navy thread, it's not really much of an issue. So starting at the top and finishing at the top will mean if you do have a long and short stitch or you want to do some back stitches, then most of the time that's going to be covered up with the flap which comes over. Okay, so the only exposed area will be your perfect stitches. So going all the way through, moving up one, place the first prong in the last hole, lean it across to dent, and then move up one, place the first prong in that dent, place the second prong down on the line, going through. This just speeds up the process. So marking it, placing it in the mark, and that way you're advancing 2 hits at a time versus just one. So, before we can install our lock, we need to make sure that we have the rear side set up and ready to stitch in with our cover leather. So what I've done here is cut a circle of leather. This has been split down to 1 millimeter. If you don't have the ability to split this down, then you can just go full thickness. It's just going to be a little bulkier on the inside. But if you can split it down, or even if you can find some thinner leather that you can dye the same color as the outside or even the inside, then you can use that. So there are many different ways of doing it. So this is a circle that's been cut, and it is 76 millimeters across. Now, it's going to be very difficult to centralize this piece over the top on the rear side, obviously, for the lock. So we want something that's going to give us a reference point. Okay, so a circle that we can follow and place this down into so that when we stitch, the stitches aren't going to be off center on this circle on the rear side. So we're going to bring back this piece, so it's important to keep it as we've used it several times now. We're going to place that back inside, and you'll notice in the center there that we have that little hole, the little mark that represents our dead center of the circle. It's what we created the seam line with. This time I'm going to go all the way through, so I'm going to get around all, place it back in that hole, and go all the way through to the other side. Now when I turn it over, I can see that little hole right here in the center there. We know our little circle of leather is 76 millimeters across, so we need to get half of that, which is 38, and adjust our wing dividers accordingly. Good. So now we've got 38. I'm going to place one part of the wing dividers into the hole, and the other part is going to make a score line all the way around. Not too heavy on the line, just enough that we can see it. And this is going to help us centralize that piece. So now when the lock is installed, backing plate goes over the top, and this piece here will have something to centralize it. The piece will shrink very slightly because we have mass in the center. So that's just something to note. It won't be exactly to that line, it will be very slightly inside of it. While we have the lock in position, it's actually now time to place our rivets through, place our backing plate down, and rivet this whole piece into place. Now the rivets that come with this are actually called split rivets or bifurcated rivets, okay, because there is two parts to it. So you have the head and you have the split end. And the idea is you place the split end through first, squeezing it together so it fits. Push it all the way through. And then very simply, all you have to do is push down each side, okay? And obviously not outwards, so you do it in line with the circle. So you turn it just so you can see it though. So you'd get a screwdriver, push it in there, and then just lightly tap it down with a hammer. Now the issue though, and you might be able to see it from here, is the bottom of the split is not actually level with the backing plate. In fact, this rivet isn't even pushed all the way through. I'd have to tap it through a bit more. So it doesn't match the level of the backing plate, which means I can spread it out just fine, but it's not going to be securing the backing plate correctly. Why Abbey England does this, I don't know what thickness they imagine that you've sandwiched in between the backing plate and the lock, but whatever it is, we're not matching it. I think these are generic ones that are just thrown in with it, and I will not be using these, and I don't recommend you use them either. Instead, I have purchased some 2mm rivets here. So the holes are 2mm, so I've purchased some pretty decent quality 2mm rivets. One thing I'd double check first of all is sometimes these rivets can have a mold line, which is just right on the inside of the head there. What you can do very carefully with a craft knife, a steel craft knife, will cut through very thin brass. Being careful not to cut yourself, obviously. Just remove that first, and that way it will fit flush with the holes on the front of the lock. Otherwise, a couple of them I've tried, they sit about 1mm or 2mm proud, so you just got to be aware of that. And now these are prepped. I'm going to place these pins through. Solid brass, obviously, same as the hardware. Now placing down the backing plate, making sure that it's the correct orientation. And you'll notice this is stamped, so one edge here is quite sharp. And the side that it actually got stamped from, like a cookie cutter, is actually slightly curved. That's the side that we want to have up and the sharp side down. So correct orientation, press that into place. So using a trusty aluminium plate here, there's actually a little hole which fits perfectly the center protrusion of the lock. So I can place that down in there, bump it forwards, and just make sure that you've taped everything that could harm the leather on the face side. And there's nothing wrong with taping up your entire lock itself. And what I've done here, it's very difficult to get in there. These rivets are actually so close to the lock mechanism, the housing. So I've had to cut a piece of 2mm leather, in fact some scrap from what we were using here, to place down to act as a bit of a spacer. So just if you're using leather instead of card, which is a bit thin to cut like this, just don't compress the leather too much. It is firm veg tan, so it's not going anywhere. Safety glasses, as always. And we're going to compress the backing plate. I'm just going to lightly place down the end cutters. And then snip. And hearing protection for as we hammer down. And just be aware of before you hammer anything, take a look on the side, lift it up, have a look underneath. Are the pins supported? Are our little tiny rivets supported by the aluminium plate underneath? If not, shift things around. You don't want to start hitting anything that isn't supported. Now I'm simply going to use the back of the hammer to get in at that tight angle there. We don't have to make it pretty. We don't need any kind of rivet setter. It doesn't need to be polished because this piece is going to be covered entirely. So when it's in use, you won't see any of this. So take your time on each piece. Don't rush it. If it helps, you can stick down the backing plate so it doesn't move around, which is what I'm going to do next. And now I'm going to take my time and start hammering these down. It's better to do lots and lots and lots of light taps in this situation, because if you use too much force, you can lose accuracy and end up hitting the housing, okay? And that could, with the wrong blow, end up rendering the entire mechanism inside useless. So do take your time, watch your fingers, lots and lots of light taps. Now, before I completely hammer this home, there's still a little bit to go. I'm going to start working the others, okay? Rather than cause a lot of pressure on here, which lifts up the other sides. I'm going to now do the opposite side here, then the opposite side here, and then finally here. But before I do anything, I'm going to have a look at my work and make sure nothing has shifted, no damage is going on. Everything looks good here. So we can carry on. And now all four are hammered down. There's still a little bit of tension that needs to be taken out, so we need to carry on hammering these down a little bit more, but they're becoming nice and snug. Okay, so now you can choose one and then begin hammering it until you're satisfied that it is creating enough tension to hold everything together, and then just make your way around. Okay, so finish this one off, then finish the opposite side off, and then the other two. So now we've turned our lock into a permanent fixture. It's on there, it's snug, it's flush on the front, and all the rivet heads are also flush against the surface, exactly how we want. There is a little bit of a flaw in this, in that there is a central pin which has been roughly domed on there, and it sticks out around 1 millimeter. If you were to place this leather down and press it into place, over the years, as a laptop go in and out, books, files, folders, etc., it will start causing this little piece to push through the leather and prematurely wear it. So to combat that, I like to create a little buffer. And what I'm going to do for that is take a piece of leather about the same height, 1 millimeter, as that little pin. Place that down. And just by eye, centralize a 3 millimeter piece, just slightly bigger than this, which is just over 2 millimeters, I believe. This happens to be a piece of split navy, so we're going to just hammer that down, place it over. Does it fit? Yes, it does. That's perfect. If you want to get fancy, you could just skive those edges down just a tad. Touch of contact adhesive, and now placing our little buffer down. I'm not going to hammer it with a polished hammer, I'm just going to press down and move it around. And that's us protected. While we're here, before we do anything else, just turn it over. make sure it works. And it does. Okay, last thing you want is to stitch everything in and then stitch this into the gussets and realize it doesn't work. At least at this point you can do something about it. At worst you could do some lock repairs. Now, taking a look at the inner circle we have here, you can see all the way around. Just inside of that, I'm going to start adding some contact adhesive. This is Yoo-hoo glue, general purpose. And the same, of course, on our cover leather. These little applicator bottles are quite handy because sometimes you can place them down and then just pull it around. This one we are keeping relatively close to the edge. And now you can place it down and just pay attention to pressing it down, up, down, left, right. So if you're going to place it down, just do it very gently first of all, making sure everything is centralized. And then just use a wooden slicker or whatever you feel comfortable with, bone folder, just to go around the edges, rub them in a little bit, get that adhesive sticking. So there we go. So it's all glued in place now. So stitching this in now, I'm going to start at the top and finish at the top. Okay. Now before you start anything, double check that you have got the correct orientation. This is the upper position, okay, so this is where the hasp comes in, and of course your bottom corners should be rounded and the top corners should be nice and sharp. That indicates you have the correct orientation before we ever stitch anything in. So starting at the top, and every few stitches I'm simply going to rotate this entire piece, because of course our seam is constantly rotating. Now, coming up to the last two stitches, showing you here on the rear side so you can see the casting that I'm doing, I'm going to use my awl and push through to make the last hole. Okay, so I can put the awl aside now. So I've got two more stitches to go. I've got the one that I just created, the hole that I just created, and we can go further onto the next one as well to complete the circle. And as you can see, there's already some thread in there. That's where we started. So there's two more stitches to do. Now, instead of doing a back stitch, I like to have things a little bit hidden. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the last two stitches in and finish them like that. And the way I'm going to do that, because we're working with an overall of 3 millimeters here, 2 millimeters for the main panel and 1 millimeter for our cover leather, I'm going to cast this once and then twice. So it's a double overhand knot. And as I pull this knot in, I'm going to leave it slightly loose there. I'm going to add a good amount of PVA glue, white glue, school glue, Elmer's glue, whatever you want to call it, so that it's going to pull this into the hole and lock it in place. And together with that double overhand knot, it becomes very secure. Now bear in mind, this isn't the final stitch, this is the second to final stitch. So there's going to be 2 of these glued and locked stitches at the very end. It's not really possible to do this on thin leather because that knot has to go somewhere, and that extra mass can get engulfed by the leather because it's thick enough, whereas thin leather you'd see a bulge. So I'll wipe up the excess for now. Again, going into the next one, this is the same hole that we actually started in. Again, 1, 2, almost all the way to the end, adding our glue, and then pull that in. Boop. And now we can trim that flush. And then bring that back to the table. And right at the front here, we can just take that excess and push it in between Right, so at this point, to get it prepped and ready to be glued and stitched onto our case so we can complete our project, I've gone ahead and finished the edge here. Okay, so just a quick bit of edge stain and a burnish. I've also gone around the edge and given it a crease line all the way around, including the top, so that it's going to be ready to follow with our pricking iron. So leaving about 1.5 to 2 millimeter gap at the top from the edge to the start of the pricking iron. I'm going to go right along the edge here. Remember the crease line that we created, we're looking for about 2.5 to 3 millimeters in from the edge. If I measured the total distance here, we are working with, yeah, it's about 3.